Good afternoon, everyone. Art, Senior Editor of Books and Related Resources at NAEYC. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar on literacy and language-related skills with the authors of the NAEYC book, So Much More Than the ABCs, The Early Phases of Reading and Writing. We're excited that Judith Schickedanz and Molly Collins are with us today to explore the importance of both oral language and literacy skills to the development of literacy and how preschool teachers can integrate both into their classroom experiences. Judith Schickedanz is Professor Emerita at Boston University. She's authored numerous articles and books, including Increasing the Power of Instruction, Writing in Preschool, and Understanding Children and Adolescents. Molly Collins is a lecturer in the Department of Teaching and Learning at Peabody College, Vanderbilt University. Her articles include the Young Children article, Sagacious, Sophisticated, and Sedulous, the importance of discussing 50-cent words with young children. Before we get started, I'd like to give just a few housekeeping details. During the presentation, Judy and Molly will refer to handouts. You can find these handouts under Event Resources, which is on the left side of your screen. After the presentation, we'll have time for questions. So if you have questions you want to ask the presenters, please write them in the question box on the lower left side of your screen. The authors will answer as many as they have time for at the end of the presentation. We also want to remind you that we do not offer continuing education credits or certificates of completion for our webinars. And the webinar will be recorded and you will be notified by email when it's available to view. So thanks again for joining us this afternoon, and let's get started. Judy and Molly, over to you.
Hello, this is Molly. Judy and I thank you for joining us today for this early literacy webinar about the relative importance of language skills and literacy skills. Many preschool teachers feel they should focus mostly on literacy skills, although they know language skills are important too. Then they wonder whether they've made the right decision. Research can help us here because researchers have examined the impact of specific sets of skills on the reading process at different points in its development. First, both oral language and literacy skills must be developed in preschool and kindergarten because they affect the children's reading success in the later grades. But different sets of skills are especially important at different times. Literacy skills developed in preschool and kindergarten have their greatest impact on the reading process in first and second grades. If we think about why, it makes sense because in first and second grades, children are learning to read, which means they're learning how to sound out words in beginning readers. The children's beginning readers are not rich in plot lines, nor are they full of diverse vocabulary. Sentences in their books are also simple and repetitive. You can hear this organization a little bit as I read from a beginning reader. Grandma looked under the sofa. The kitten was not there. Sister Kate looked under the bed. The kitten was not there. In contrast, oral language skills developed in preschool and kindergarten have their greatest impact on the reading process in later grades, third and fourth, and beyond, when the major task of reading is comprehension. This makes sense as children are beginning now to read and learn. So it's critical for teachers to know that both sets of skills must be developed in the early years, even though the oral language set does not have its most important impact on a child's reading for several years. So here's the preschool teacher's dilemma and the consequences in a nutshell. On the one hand, preschool teachers today know the importance of developing preschoolers' oral language because it is essential later for reading comprehension. But they also know that literacy skills are critical for learning to read and therefore feel they should come first. Many preschool teachers focus primarily on literacy skills rather than give equal emphasis to language-related skills and literacy skills. Yet, they worry that this decision will hurt children in the long run. Will it?
Well, now you know that the research says, yes, it will. In the long run. And that is the important part here of how long it takes for the importance of language-related skills in preschool to show up. Now, as Molly illustrated with a few lines from the book, it was designed for learning to read. Simplified books have familiar vocabulary, simple sentences, and very familiar content that children can comprehend easily as soon as the words are decoded. But things begin to change by third grade, when books become more challenging then, and they increase in challenge with each successive school year. Books are now resources, major resources for children's new learning. And this is when support for oral language and content knowledge in preschool starts to pay off. So preschool teachers should talk to fourth grade teachers, not just to first grade teachers, and they would hear a little more about this. Now, one interesting thing is children can do very well in decoding and actually have fairly high reading achievement during the early learning to read phase. But then in fourth grade especially, we often see what's called the fourth grade slump. Achievement drops. And in other words, decoding alone is not enough to support comprehension. So children with weaker language and content skills, their reading achievement goes down because assessment of reading at this point and on forward is on the content that you learn from what you read. The assessment is not of decoding skills unless you have a reading problem, and then you'll be working on decoding skills as a child still. But the major assessment from third, fourth grade and beyond is on the content you learn. So the bottom line is long-term success in school requires pre-K support for both language-related skills and knowledge and literacy skills. We have to do it all.
Okay, we've used the term decoding and the term language skills. Let's take a look at the items inside each one and see what's there. The first domain is code-related skills. Other people might have more, but for Judy and me, these are the big three. Alphabet letter name knowledge, phonological awareness, as we see in rhyming games with children or beginning sound games, words that begin with the same sound. You know some of those. And concepts of print. A good example of one is that print is read from left to right and top to bottom in English and other languages too. For the second domain, oral language skills, there are three specific items. Vocabulary and conceptual knowledge. For example, nocturnal animals such as owls stay awake at night. Facility with syntax, and you might hear children's errors. Daddy not going to the store. And morphological errors. I sawed two horses. So children need facility and syntax with syntax and morphology, which is how sentences and how words go together. The third component is understanding how language is used for different purposes, such as to tell, to request, to explain, or to clarify. And skills from both of these domains are explained further in Handout 1. So if you want to refer to that, you may. Headings on the handout match items listed on the slide.
Well, what led to the current dilemma? And I'll put that in other words. What gave preschool educators some wiggle room to focus primarily on literacy skills and slight language-related knowledge and skills? And then, who pushed back? The answer to the first question about wiggle room is that the report from the National Literacy Panel provided some. And then some language and literacy experts pushed back with critiques of the NELP report published in a special issue of Educational Researcher. And Molly will have some details about the wiggle room and the pushback.
So what did the National Early Literacy Panel do, and what is contained in their report? Well, first, they examined results from meta-analyses about the foundational knowledge that predicts later reading and spelling, and this was very helpful for us to know. The report also emphasized code-related abilities and minimized language because the direct relationship of language to learning to read was weaker. So let me make that clear or say it a slightly different way. The direct relationship of language to learning to read was weaker than the direct relationship of literacy skills to learning to read. And this makes some sense. In view of information a few slides ago regarding when skills have their greatest impact on the reading process. Also, the panel found more effects of early interventions on code-related skills than on language, and there were many more interventions that dealt with code-related skills than with language skills for the panel to include. So, it might be easier to teach code-related skills than language skills, and it takes longer to conduct a study that measures the full impact of language skills because preschoolers must be followed through 3rd and 4th grade or beyond. Longitudinal studies require more funding as well as more researcher time, and the research that gets done may be the research that doesn't take so long. So that's what the panel said. Now to the critiques of the report published in Educational Researcher. So I'm talking about bullets 1 and 2 here. Language ability strongly supports reading comprehension, and early language growth predicts later language growth. We know these things from research, even though the panel found far more studies that examined literacy skills and kind of went with that. And bullet 1 informs bullet 2. In some, from the language research we do have, we know that language is critical to comprehension and builds over time, and an early start helps ensure later growth. Literacy skills strongly predict success in learning to read, that is, decoding words. Critics agree that literacy skills strongly predict learning to read, but stress that decoding skill, though necessary, is insufficient for supporting reading comprehension. They thought that the NELP report did not make this point strongly enough. Because it's easier to teach and measure literacy skills than language skills, and literacy skills are critical for learning to decode words, they are often overemphasized at the preschool level. And finally, as you might imagine, later reading comprehension is compromised if the priority in preschool is on literacy skills, not on both language and literacy skills.
Okay, so the teacher often asks, well, how can I do it all? That's a lot to do. And I think that's a fair question. It is difficult to do it all. And it's especially difficult when preschool teachers believe or have been told that literacy skills, number 1, must be taught in isolation of each other, and number 2, must be taught outside of actual context of their use. In other words, a lot of people who focus on or give a great importance to literacy skills, and actually we think they're very important, also have some strong beliefs about how you approach the instruction in a very isolated, what I would call skill and real fashion. Well, Molly and I would agree that some instruction should focus on alphabet letter knowledge only and on phonological awareness only. But we also know that children can learn literacy skills within broader experiences that integrate instruction for both literacy skills and language-related knowledge and skills. So today, we use examples to illustrate 3 kinds of experiences where the instruction can be integrated. And the first bullet, is recalling and recording past experiences. And the second is engaging in mealtime conversation. And the third is using alphabet instruction that also supports language and content development. It really is possible to do that. Okay, I'm going to start with recalling and recording experiences and an example of that called a spring walk. After a quick overview here, I'll provide some details about one teacher's implementation and put some more details on this experience. So overall, children and teachers walk near the preschool talking about what they see on an early spring day. Later that day, and on several subsequent days, the teacher and children gather as a group to talk about what they saw on their walk. The teacher writes down children's recollections on a piece of prepared chart paper under the heading, What We Saw on Our Walk. And then more children share recollections on a couple of subsequent days. And on day one, before the group is dismissed, the teacher also makes some suggestions for related activities for choice time. So let's take day one. And the teacher had time to listen and respond to 3 children's recollections. The first child said, I saw some yellow flowers. And the second child said, I saw some big rocks. And the third child said, some bikes. So let's, I will use the first child's response and the teacher's recollection and the teacher's response to that to illustrate how this works, what the teacher's actually doing, the instructional details here. I won't have time to do the other 2 children, but some information about those interactions are on the handout. So first of all, recall that the child number 1 said, I saw some yellow flowers. The teacher then said, yes, we did see a lot of daffodils blooming in someone's yard. Daffodils are beautiful bright yellow flowers that bloom very early in the spring, just about as soon as it begins to get warm. Okay, so specifically, those details relate to use precise language and verbal responses and add a bit of information. So the teacher named the flowers daffodils. I'm sure that was done on the walk also, but often children don't pick up the precise terminology. This child says, I saw, some yellow flowers. So the teacher uses the precise name of the flower, daffodils, and also used the term yard, the context where they were seen. And then, in terms of adding information, added that daffodils bloom fairly early in the spring, and then after that tucked in sort of a definition of spring, early in the spring, about as soon as it begins to get warm. Okay, and then bullets number 1 and 2, or the second and third bullet, name letters used when writing words down, and linked a few sounds in the spoken words to letters used to write them. So here's what the teacher did next after the verbal response. She said, okay, I'll write yellow daffodils down on our chart that I've prepared here. And she read the heading, What We Saw on Our Walk. And then she said, okay, to write yellow, we use the letter Y. And she writes a Y. And then she says, we use E next, writes the E. And then we need 2 L's. And she writes those. And then we need the letters O and W. And she writes those 2 letters. And then continuing, she said, now we need the second word, daffodils. And she says, daffodils starts with the D sound. And we use the letter D to write duh. So she wrote that down. And then we need the letter A. She writes that. We need 2 F's. She writes those. An O and a D and an I and then an L and then an S. And so she names and she writes all the letters. Now, what's interesting then is she read the entry and underlined the 2 words that she did. And when she was reading daffodils, she lingered with her finger just a bit under the first D of daffodils, as she said, duh, daffodil, and then dills. So she's also linking the letter that's written now to the sound that she's seen in the word. So we can see here how the teacher dealt with literacy skills as well as with language and content knowledge. Now, I'm suspecting that some people out there are saying to themselves, well, there's not much conversation here. The child shared a recollection and the teacher basically commented on it. And I will agree that there really isn't a back and forth here in terms of conversation and not conversation that includes the other children about this one child's recollection. But keep in mind, this was a group study of about 20 children. And those of you who are teachers of preschoolers know that it's rather difficult to hold everybody's attention. And so sometimes teachers make the decision to respond just as this teacher did, and then go on to the next recollection, and then another one, knowing that on the walk itself there was a lot of conversation. And then you'll see in the follow-up opportunities, there's opportunities for more. And we always have to make very hard decisions. And so with preschoolers, we are always outnumbered. That's one of the problems. Okay, So let's go to the next slide, setting the stage for the next day. So before this day ended, keep in mind she had responded to 2 more children, and then she says, we don't have enough time today to write down more children's recollections, but there will be time tomorrow, the next day. And then she said to the children, you can make drawings or paintings, she said drawings best were here, to illustrate the list of recollections on our chart paper. And you can see here flowers drawn with markers by one child. And she said, I'll glue them to our chart. And she did glue some. And then she said, or you can paint or draw pictures to take home, or you can donate them to a class bulletin board display, which she also had planned. Now, this teacher knew that drawing and painting pictures during choice time the children would be thinking about what they had seen. There's probably some talk going on about it. And this might help children the next day who want to share what they saw on the walk. And then the bulletin board display, you also knew that's another opportunity to talk with children about what they want to donate to the bulletin board. And there's always, in this classroom especially, labels with the child's name and then the teacher's writing down of what the child said. So you get literacy skills in the bulletin board activity as well. So it's not a one-shot deal of just one day with a few children pulling about their recollections. Now take a look at the handout. This is handout 2 now, the first page, first column. And we don't have time to go over this, and you'll be able to have it a little bit later. But I did want to point out that the last 3 bullets of the literacy skills address, the 6th one, a letter appears in many different words. For example, yellow daffodil. And then when writing or reading English print, we move from left to right and top to bottom. And space is used to separate words. Now, those particular literacy skills, the teacher did not mention specifically. She only modeled, and data are available for children to observe. And I just wanted to make the point that one value of these contextualized experiences is there's really a lot more in the situation. It's not taught directly, that children do over time just soak up, and that is really important learning. Now, just to call to your attention in terms of the language-related knowledge and skills, there are 6 bullets there, and the last 4 give you details of how the teacher responded to the second and third child, if you want to take a look at that. Okay.
A second opportunity lies in conversations at meal times, likely underutilized context because we might not realize their potential or we're just busy doing other things at mealtime. Children are sitting and we're tucking in other tasks. The bullets on this slide orient us to the conversation about grits, and so I'll go over a few of those points. Children and teachers eat meals family style in the classroom, and the food is prepared in the school cafeteria and then is served in the classroom. Children are seated at 3 round tables. One teacher sits and eats at one of the tables while an assisting teacher circulates serving food. The children and teacher have extended conversations about activities and events at home and at school, including the food served during the mealtime. And conversations are usually specific to a table, but children often participate across tables, and the teacher encourages that because it focuses them and keeps them engaged. And as you know, the teacher can only be at one table at one time. And really, in this context, the teacher can do quite a lot, as we'll see. So let's look at handout 2, page 1, column 2, under the heading, A Conversation About Grits. I'm going to read the conversation, and I'd like for you to listen for the opportunities the teacher used for oral language skill development. Okay, so a bit about the setting. There were 20 children, and they're seated around 3 large round tables having breakfast in a Head Start classroom in a large Midwestern U.S. city. There's a large bowl of grits on the table and some other food items on trays and in bowls, including scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, and rolls. And an assisting teacher in the room circulates, and she's helping with managerial duties of breakfast. Okay, here we go. Did you want any grits? Something inaudible. Give you energy. Yes, they give you energy too. But I don't like grits. Grits? But grits are made out of, does anyone know what grits are made out of? No one answers. It's made out of corn. Grits? Grits? Made out of corn. You don't like corn? Don't you like corn? Grits make the something inaudible. But the teacher heard it. Yes, I like corn too. At least that's your favorite color, yellow. It sure is. The corn is yellow. They just take out the inside of the corn, grind it up, and make grits. And you eat it? So, you might have noticed a variety of opportunities for supporting oral language in mealtime conversations. And so I want to examine these briefly here. The teacher listened and she participated. She was there in the extended conversation. She generated an authentic topic, which is very rich and meaningful. And in doing that, she created a welcoming environment. She involved multiple children. She expanded their comments. She affirmed their correct offerings. She affirmed their participation. One of the nice things she did is provide clear explanations, and she used new vocabulary in the context of this talk. A really rich feature of this conversation is that the teacher fostered content knowledge and reasoning, as well as the integration of background information. And that's a pretty hefty load to foster. And finally, she modeled discourse skills, how to start a conversation, responding contingently to what people say, and deepening understanding through multiple exchanges. In view of the teacher's realization of these opportunities for building oral language skills, children stand to gain a lot, really. So what did they learn? Let's look at Handout 2, right where we left off after the conversation on page 2. Look in the first column, language-related knowledge and skills. Through the teacher's modeling and language use, the children learned how to start conversations and talk about topics in their immediate environment, and we call that contextualized talk. Children heard word order for sentences and questions. They heard new vocabulary a number of times, and they heard expansions of utterances, which fosters connections to content and what we're talking about. Children also learn to listen to other children and to the teacher and to respond with relevant comments. They learn to think deeply about a topic by having multiple exchanges or expecting that multiple exchanges were just fine. They learn to consider and bring to the conversation their background knowledge. And we know this. Children know some things. Sometimes they don't think they do, but they do, and they should use this. Children learn to make logical connections among utterances because the teacher modeled this. And sometimes this is hard. Let's take a look for a moment. This teacher was able to take a child's comment and make a logical connection. For example, when the child said, "At least that's your favorite color, yellow," the conversation might have veered off to favorite colors, or it might have just ended, but the teacher didn't let it. She affirmed the child's statement and tied it right back to the topic by saying, "It sure is, the corn is yellow. They just take it," and then she talked more about the process. Children learned conceptual and content knowledge about corn because the teacher provided it, and she kept it as a salient piece of the conversation. So in this sense, the teacher had children acquire some knowledge about grits and corn during this conversation. So if you have conversations such as these, that is those that are rich in oral language support, you position young children for learning, for other learning opportunities throughout the day. And let me talk about a few examples here. Look at photo 1, titled Breakfast Menu. Conversations at mealtime can offer opportunities across other contexts and throughout the day. For example, the teacher could enlist the children's help in creating a breakfast menu like this one. In a small or large group activity, children could help list items as the teacher writes. Judy's example demonstrated how language and literacy skills can be supported, and similar opportunities exist here. In photograph 2, food boxes with prints can be placed in the dramatic play area for several days. For example, after the conversation about grits at breakfast, teachers could include a box of cornmeal or instant grits on the dramatic play area food shelf. Teachers can introduce new items in a large or small group setting. And when a teacher plays with children, which we advocate, the teacher might use the new prop by reading what's inside or reading directions for preparing and modeling how we use print. In photograph 3, you'll see a classroom graph. Conversations at mealtime can include those about everyone's favorite food. Graphing the results of a survey of these favorite foods can support math skills. In the survey graph here, children's favorite foods were listed by the teacher, voted on by children with Post-its, and tallied spatially in the graph. So the mealtime grits conversation example really didn't end at mealtime, did it? It became a springboard for supporting literacy and conceptual knowledge throughout the day.
Okay, and as Molly was talking about the grits conversation, and I noticed that, the back and forth there, I was thinking that was a focused conversation on grits. It's quite different from the spring walk language experience of having children share their recollections and having a number of those. It's not quite as focused. Of course, it's all about the spring walk, but there are different things that children mention. So just, again, my point is that different contexts allow different things to happen and also put various restrictions or remove some restrictions on the kind of talking and conversation or verbal interactions we can have with children. Okay, but now we're going on to the letter clue game. And with this one, I would like for you, wherever you are, to play along, and in 2 ways. First, I would like for you to play along with me as I serve as the teacher, as if I'm in front of a group of children. Now, you will not see me draw the clues, but I will give verbal descriptions, and I think you will be able to know what you should draw on your paper. So I would like you to play teacher, as I said, and then at the same time, for you, I would like for you to think about the children. If you were a child, or if children you know were sitting there watching these clues drawn, what would they be thinking? So to play this game, we start, first of all, I need a large piece of chart paper or a large white marker board. Either one will do, and I've used both, and I've seen both used. It does need to be large, and you'll see why in just a minute. So I say to the children, I'm thinking of a letter, and I can see it in my mind. I'm going to give you 1 clue at a time, and after each clue, I will ask you if you have an idea of the letter that's in my mind. Okay, here's the first clue. Now, to write this letter, we start with a long vertical line. And I go down to make the long vertical line, like this. Okay, now, does anybody have any ideas about what letter might be in my mind? And let's say that there is a child named Danielle, and she says, I know. And I ask, what letter do you think? And she says, D. It's very typical for children to use the first letters of their first name. And I say, oh, I know what you're thinking. I know exactly what you're thinking, and you are right, that when we make D, we start with a long vertical line. Now, at this point, I've moved to the side of my chart paper or my white marker board because I'm going to make a D. So I draw the long vertical line, and then I say, and then we go to the very top of that line, and we go around to the right, and we curve, and we meet that line, meet the bottom of the long vertical line. So I can see what you were thinking. But you know what? The letter in my mind is not D. Does somebody else have an idea? And let's say there's a Brian or a Brianna, and they say, I think it's B. And I go through the same process of, I know what you're thinking, and I draw that letter also to the side, and then say to them, but that's not the letter that's in my mind, but I see what you're thinking. And you're right, the B does start with we do start making a B with a long vertical line. So I say, okay, let me give you a second clue. Now, the second line we use when we write the letter that's in my mind is a short horizontal line added at the very top of the long vertical line, like this. So I draw a short horizontal line to the right from the top of the large vertical line. Now, this is when it begins to really get interesting in terms of what children are thinking. Almost always, someone will say, T, I think it's T. And I say to them, and I'm going to make it to you over here, I know what you're thinking because I have watched a lot of you when you've made a T, and you make a long vertical line, and then what you do often is you make a short horizontal line over this way to the right, and then you make another one, a short horizontal line, over to the left. But when I make my T, and when a lot of adults make T's, here's how we do it. We draw, and I'm making a T, of course, another T. We draw a vertical line, and then we start over here, away from the top of the vertical line, and we go over to the right, past the vertical line, and like that. So I use just one line when I'm making a T. So T is not the letter in my mind. And then someone also invariably will say L. I know it's an L. And again, I know what you're thinking. And I draw a long vertical line, and then I put the short vertical line at the bottom for an L. And then I point out to the children, but I put mine at the top. And you know when we're writing letters, where you put the line matters. Exactly the same lines, but just in different positions. But I don't say this to children, but I'm going to say to you, orientation is a distinctive feature of letters that doesn't exist in the three-dimensional world. So they're not on to that. So then I say, okay, let me give you a third clue. So the third line in this letter that's in my mind, I have to go to the middle of the long vertical line, and then I draw another short horizontal line to the right. Now, of course, I have formed an F, and a lot of children will be shouting out, it's an F, it's an F, it's an F, and I'll say, it is. But, of course, if E was the letter in my mind, I might say to them, but you know what? That's not the letter that was in my mind. I have to add one more clue. And I go to the bottom of the vertical line and put the last line of the E there. So that is the letter clue game. Now, I guess you have noticed my language. So let's just talk about the language learning first. And this is on the second page of the handout, too. Vertical line. I don't use terminology that I think is really not what children deserve. I don't say I do this. I'm going to make a stick. I'm going to make a little balloon. No, it's a vertical. I mean, it's a long vertical line. It's a short horizontal line. I'm going to the very top. I'm going to go to the middle. Here's the bottom. So the language is really very rich in this experience. And then, of course, in terms of literacy skills, naming letters, obviously, but the really important critical learning here for letters is children are getting this big idea that very small changes or differences make a different letter. And that's not true of many items that belong to the same category in the three-dimensional world. I mean, they vary a lot. Cars vary a lot. Chairs vary a lot. Everything varies a lot, but not here. There's variation across fonts, but you add more and more line at the bottom of the vertical line after you have made an F, and now we're in E territory. If you don't close the tops of your A's, because maybe you don't know yet there are H's, you are in H territory, even though you don't know it. So this is a wonderful, wonderful game activity. Children love it. They want to play more letters each day. I always say to teachers, just do one or two. You always want to stop when they want more, not when you've beaten them actually to death and they're worn out. But the other thing I want to call to your attention, and Molly mentioned, I think, with the grits conversation, that there was some thinking and reasoning. We'll talk about thinking and reasoning. This is a real reasoning activity. Children are thinking, they're comparing. They're using information they have to draw conclusions. So the reasoning is wonderful. So it's possible to have literacy skills, teach literacy skills in a very thoughtful way. And then this approach, and I must say, this was developed by a teacher many years ago who I worked with, or who worked for me in the lab school. Wonderful. I've used it with all kinds of children, and it is very popular. But a good example of literacy skills and language skills all rolled into one. And again, look at Handout too. It does review what the learnings are for children. I won't take time here to read through the list. Okay.
So, as we illustrate today, preschool teachers really must address both literacy skills and language-related knowledge and skills. We have to do both. Preschool teachers can provide experiences in which instruction for both domains is integrated, as illustrated in our examples. And in this way, preschool teachers really can indeed do it all.
Thank you, Judy and Molly, for that packed with information discussion. We have a number of excellent questions from listeners, so I will try to fit as many in as I can during this the rest of our time together. First, what does the research say about teaching sight words and word families in pre-K?
Want me to respond first, Molly? Okay.
Sure.
We know that I'm going to run ahead to kindergarten, first and second grade beginning readers, kids who are beginning to read. We do know that knowing some sight words, and a lot of these are acquired in the early readers that are designed to teach such things. In fact, I can think of a series that really is all about sight words. Now, in terms of teaching them at the preschool level, again, I am not... here's my problem. I don't like lists of words that we teach directly. I don't think it's necessary. What I think we can do is, in a lot of different contexts throughout the day in and day out, we can write things down. Now, in the spring walk example, the teacher actually wrote down, like yellow daffodils was not a whole sentence, obviously. And what she did with bikes and big rocks, she just put big rocks and bikes. And there was a reason for that. She didn't want to make it laborious. But there are other situations where in a group or at the writing drawing table or someplace else, at mealtime conversations maybe, you might have a piece of paper to write something down, but you would write them naturally in what you're composing. And then in books, I think of book titles. Talk about some sight words. I wish I had my pile of children's literature right here. I can pull some, but is it The Snowy Day or A Snowy Day? I forget. But sight words are all over the place in book titles. Now, usually when we introduce a book the first time, we underline the title and read it just for the information. And I do not like, I'm very opinionated here, for someone to stop after they read a book title and say, oh, does anyone see an A in one of those words? No, I want them thinking about what the book might be about. I don't like literature skills taught in that context. However, having said that, I do think if we underline the print and we read it, and then say the next day, or 2 days later, or sometime we read the same book, we underline, and I find myself pausing at the beginning. I already know the title pretty well, and leaving them to look at the print and read with me. And there's a lot of exposure to sight words that can be, you can get that way. So, and now just in terms of some research, though, in terms of sight words taught in preschool, I don't really know of any research that shows that pays off. What I do know, and I'm thinking of David Shar's work, he makes the point that as children learn to read, and they read even a new word that's short a number of times, it becomes a sight word. That what he calls phonological recoding, children do pick up some sight words. So I think there's plenty of time for it. In the beginning readers, in kindergarten, I think there's a little too much stress on language reading in kindergarten, frankly, but there are books that are designed to do this. I would not spend my time deliberately in preschool teaching lists of sight words. Molly, what do you think?
I agree with everything you said, Judy, and I will second the notion that I don't know of any research that shows that pays off either. And I also think we need to think about what we're saying about oral language in the preschool, the early years, and focus quite a bit on language and how language is used. And in the small group settings or the one-on-one where you can authentically tuck in some information about print, as you said, I think is the richest way to call attention to that. But at any rate, I don't have other things to add. I think you said it very well.
And I think the knowledge of language that you just mentioned is extremely important, because part of what we do when we read, even when we're learning to read, is we're pulling from the language we have. And in a sentence, if a the makes sense or an makes sense, or, we're likely to be helped greatly by that in decoding the print. So, okay, next question.
Thank you. What are some examples of strategies for supporting the language and literacy skills of preschoolers who have language development delays?
Well, I'll go first again, Molly, but I won't talk too long. I think good language context and good preschool is good for everybody. Every child is learning language at the preschooler. I don't want to diminish the fact that some children have considerable difficulty. I think many children still have difficulty because they have not been exposed to a lot of language, and of course some children are learning a second language, or a third to some. But I think rich experiences where the environment is there that we can refer to and talk about is extremely helpful. I used to run a lab school, and there would be 9, or I think one year, 11 different languages in a group of 18 children. They were from all over the world, and so you found yourself gesturing and sort of honing in on keywords and then putting in an envelope of a whole sentence. So you would say, spoon, spoon, this is your spoon, that's so-and-so spoon, let's say we're having snack or something. But I think, I think there's a place and a need for language specialists when there are children who have very specific language difficulties, but when it comes to the classroom, I think rich experiences in teachers who interact and talk with children and adapt and adjust to help them get meaning, both you getting their meaning and they getting yours. And it's just interacting all the time and paying attention. So, Molly, what do you think?
I will agree with you wholeheartedly and just add a couple of points of refinement. One of the things that I was sending you a high five for when you were talking about the rich language within the classroom is the importance of modeling by the teacher. So yes to rich vocabulary. I want to add clarity of expression, and teachers need to be clear not only in how they produce language, but also how they structure language. When young children have language delays, sometimes we really don't know everything that's going on with that. And sometimes kids are misdiagnosed. But in cases where it's an expressive problem, sometimes children outgrow that with rich support, but their receptive knowledge is just fine. So we don't want to create a contrived context or experience for them where we're just sort of running around producing language or making them use language in non-meaningful ways. So it ties back into what Judy said, is good instruction is really needed, and talking about things that are contextually in the environment. I also think that talking about decontextualized or using decontextualized talk is very important for children's thinking. Now, the cognitive load is higher, and decontextualized talk refers to talking about things that are not in the here and now or the present environment. So conversations about what you did at the playground, for example, if you're sitting at snack. But the overall point is to provide really rich support and recognize that there's more going on in a child than the delay, and that goes for more than just language.
Yeah. Say one other thing, too, is I think the role of songs and poems that we used to do a lot of in preschool, the formulaic language, which means that there's language there that is repeated, and as you sing a song, multiple days and say poems, that sometimes does help a child with delays to get a start. But let's not forget the role of songs and poems in preschool. I don't see enough of that anymore myself. Anyway, but that was a good question and a difficult one. And I think, Molly, the sorting out, that's where I mean the speech and language specialist, you really have to sort out, what is going on here. So you're not artificially saying there's a problem of some kind when maybe there isn't that problem. Exactly.
That's true. And let me tuck in, because I didn't before, storybook reading is so powerful for all children, but especially so for children who need repetitions and might be assisted learning the language with visuals. So read as part of a curriculum that you have for your classroom, and choose good books to do so.
Okay, thank you. This listener wonders if this is an appropriate activity for an older 4 to 5-year-old pre-K class, and that is, when we are talking about our letter of the week in class, we also sing a song about the letter sound. We talk about words being made up of letter sounds. I found that the children, by the end of the school year, began to sound out short words on their own. Again, do you think this is an appropriate activity for older 4 and 5-year-olds?
Well, a couple of comments about it. First of all, I'm not terribly fond of letter of the week, because I don't think we need to focus in that particular way. The other comment I would make is, and 4 and 5-year-olds, and see, I have to know what these 4 and 5-year-olds know before I do that with them. But I want to make the distinction between phonological awareness and phonics. And it sounds like the activity here is phonics, saying that D makes the D sound, B makes the B sound, so forth. As opposed to, and children do arrive at that knowledge, acquire that knowledge, when you do what I demonstrated in the teacher who was writing daffodils and said, oh, daffodil starts with D, and we use D to write that sound. One of the confusions that children often have when you do this activity you're talking about with 4 and 5-year-olds, or you teach phonics to 3 and 4-year-olds, is, oh, they can memorize the sound that a letter makes and spout it back. But what they don't understand is that the sounds we're talking about are the sounds we hear when we say words. And I need to become sensitive to hearing the sequence of sounds in words. So I need to know what the 4 and 5-year-olds, and I'd also like to know what else they're doing in terms of writing and using knowledge to generate words and so forth. So, it's hard out of context to say whether that is or is not appropriate for the children who are there. But I would need to know what else those 4 and 5-year-olds know, and remember that decoding is one thing, and simple books are one thing, and then we need to look ahead to the reasoning and the challenging and the figuring out of more difficult words even as time goes on. And what do they do then? Do they fold, say, I can't do it, it's too hard? I don't know. Anyway, good question.
So, Judy and Molly, a couple of listeners have wondered what you think about using dot-to-dot letters as a support when children are learning to write letters.
Okay, a great question. I get that all the time. I don't like dot-to-dot for letters, and I'll tell you why. Children go from one dot to the next, and typically in a dot-to-dot worksheets I've seen, there's more than one dot, let's say for the long vertical line in E. And children need to learn the strokes, the elements of the letters, which the letter clue game models beautifully. And often it's very interesting. children don't necessarily perceive when they see a letter to be composed of the lines that we know it is. So the T is a great example. Apparently, the visual perception by many preschoolers is the T is one vertical line, and it goes up all the way to the top, and then there's a short line to the right and a short line to the left. And really, there are just two segments in T. For E's, they often think that the top line, the vertical line, and the bottom line are just one stroke. So part of the value of the letter clue game is that children actually see the strokes. But I would like to expose children to the actual stroke and then let them make the awkward letters that they will as they attempt to write and draw and whatever, and not do dot to dot. So because the dot to dots get in my way of communicating to children what the actual segments or line elements are in letters, and I don't think they're that useful. Now, that's different from what I call using a selected dot sometimes. So K is a famous example, and children will say things like, I can't get my K to look right. Because, you draw the vertical line instead of done that. And then they have to kind of guess where out in space to the right I start to do the diagonal line into the middle. So it depends on the child, but I'll say, okay, I'm going to put a dot over here to the right where you can start that diagonal line into the middle. And there are I'm trying to think of other instances where I do selective dotting, but that's a bit later. Sometimes what comes up also are stencil letters, the plastic frames, and I do not like those either because for a different reason, the same reason, but an additional one. In development for fine motor skill, that hand goes from being stiff and up off the table to resting on the table, and then the fingers are holding the utensil. Well, to do stencils, children have to hold the arm up to fit the end of the pencil or marker into the line. So we're working against ourselves there in terms of just children, gradually getting the arm and the hand to work the way that we need it to. So I don't find much useful either. I'm old now. I just keep wishing that we could. It sounds so corny to trust children because we do need to teach. We need to model. There needs to be a lot of input. Their knowledge comes from somewhere, and we are to somewhere. On the other hand, I wish that we could have some patience with children to let them then take what they see, take what information verbally we give, and to try it on their own, and for us to be happy with the steps and the struggles along the way. And what's interesting about the letter clue game with 4-year-olds, and as the year goes on, when children at the writing table, I find they'll stop sometimes and they'll say, okay, I have the long, and sometimes it'll be, I have the long vertical line, not vertical. Now, what's the second clue? So they're asking, they have soaked up in a way that there are segments, and they are drawn in a certain order in a certain direction. And then they kind of use that framework, and they'll ask the teacher, and then you can give information. But I find that by 4.5, and certainly sometimes early kindergartners are so hard on themselves that they have. But anyway, I just, I think there's something to be said for struggling, although preschoolers don't even view it as struggling. It's their best effort. But to go through a process of my best effort now and having that accepted, and my best effort 2 or 4 weeks from now, and to go through that process where you realize that your skill has changed and that you have worked on it. I mean, they don't view it as work, although they do work pretty hard at the writing table sometimes on their own. It's just amazing to me. And I think I want them to do that. I think there's a larger lesson of learning there of what life is about. Some things take a while, and you have to work at it. So that's the long answer to what I think of dot to dots and stencil stuff. I guess that was the question we were still on. Okay, Molly, get the next three. I see we're going on for 30 more minutes. That's wonderful.
Okay, well, thank you, Judy and Molly. We are unfortunately out of time, but we want to thank you and all of our listeners for participating in this wonderful conversation. And that wraps it up. Thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.